Now, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bloomberg UK, a special focus on the biggest challenges facing the British government, the economy, financial services, and markets. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, next Wednesday, an important day for the UK political calendar with one of the most important budget statements in recent years. Now, to preview the big event, Bloomberg has an interactive game for you on the web. You take the role of the Chancellor, having to make tough decisions about the economy, trying not to crash the pound or send financial markets spiraling. Well, I'm joined by the brilliant creator of the Bloomberg budget game, who's also our UK government reporter, Joe Mays. Joe, I've played 5 times. I've either completely crashed the economy or I've been so austere that no one gets anything. So talk us through how it works.
Yeah, the game's quite hard, Fran. So, you are the Chancellor and you are under pressure to come up with a package that will help the Conservative Party win the next election, deliver some tax cuts, get voters on side. But you start from this pretty difficult position, which is where the Office for Budget Responsibility says you've only got £13 billion to play with. So your first choice in the game is, am I going to increase the amount of money available for giveaways, or do I stick to the current spending plan? So if you're Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, you probably want to stick to current plans, because if you cut public spending, you could be accused of austerity. So imagine we've done that. And then your next choice is around income tax. And we think the Chancellor is likely to cut at least 1 percentage point off income tax. So let's go for that. Let's cut the basic rate of income tax. We have national insurance. We know that the Chancellor cut that out of the autumn statement. He'd like to do that again, so let's go for that. Let's cut another 1p off national insurance. More tax choices. Stamp duty. This would help homeowners if you were to increase the threshold at which it's paid. Let's imagine we're going for all the tax cuts. Let's increase the stamp duty threshold. Inheritance tax, another big giveaway the Chancellor could do, would cost £7 billion to do it. It's a tax that's not liked in the country. Let's cut that as well. We're going full optimism here. And then finally, you have the fuel duty decision, another big one the Chancellor has to do. He can let that fuel duty freeze. He can maintain it, which would help motorists. And let's say he does that. So we've locked in our decisions. How did we do? We're on our final screen here. Budget day has arrived. And we have crashed the markets. We have gone too far with our tax cuts. As you see, we've gone well into the red with our borrowing. We've blown out our fiscal headroom. We've broken our fiscal rules. We've repeated the Liz Truss episode. I guess this playthrough shows that the Chancellor has that constraint around his headroom. You can't go too far, otherwise you risk the wrath of interest rates rising again and general chaos. So, yeah, try to avoid that outcome when playing the game.
I love it so much, Joe. It's fun. I mean, you can do it over and over until you get it right, which I have not been able to do yet. Bloomberg's UK government reporter, Joe Mays, and, of course, the creator of the Play the Budget game, which is available for free on the Bloomberg website. It's pretty fun. I also got my kids to do it. They were even worse than me, apart from the youngest one, who's 5. He did great. For viewers in the UK, join us on Wednesday for special coverage of the Chancellor's spring budget, plus all of the reaction and analysis. Our coverage begins at 12:15 with the Chancellor's speech at around 12:30. Coming up, we'll have plenty more on the UK. We'll talk inflation, and then we'll talk also a little bit of luxury. This is Bloomberg. Now, PwC report says the gender pay gap has widened in the UK, consistently lagging its OECD country partners. Meanwhile, the FTSE Women Leaders review was released on Tuesday, showing board representation in the top FTSE 350 companies has reached beyond 40%. I'm pleased to be joined by the chief executive of the FTSE Women Leaders review, Denise Wilson. The review is an independent business-led initiative backed by the government, focusing on increasing women's representation in the FTSE and beyond. So, Denise, thank you so much for joining us. Are you disappointed with what we found out?
No, I mean, I think we've been overridingly pleased with the response to the review and the way British business has got behind this. We know there's still a long way to go on gender pay gap, and much of that, around 75%, is the motherhood penalty. So, we need to do more to address gender balance, bringing men into the home as well as men and women into the workplace. And that's one of the key areas that we've got to work with. But overridingly, FTSE 350 boards are now at 42%, increasing every year. Last year, we hit the target of 40%, 2 years still to go, and showing there's much more gains to come. So that was really encouraging. Then when we look at women in leadership,
Denise,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about women in leadership. So just over half of the FTSE 350 companies have achieved or are well on the way to achieving gender balance. Is this really positions of power? What I hear from a lot of the females on the boards is that they're on the boards, they talk, but actually they're not the end decision maker, and that makes a big difference.
Well, I think this is a long journey. We have been working really hard to bring gender balance to the top of companies, not just boards, but in the leadership team, which is the top 80 to 100 roles, which we capture and monitor. So exec committee and the direct reports underneath. And building there, we have 35% women in that cohort this year, which, a decade ago, it wasn't even measured actually. But if I took a guess, it would have been in single digits. So all of that is progress. But one of our other recommendations is the 4 key roles. So that's the chair, the senior independent director, the finance director, and the CEO. And we've seen strong progress in the SID, in the senior independent director, now 47%, so near parity. Women in the SID role, chairs and FDs in the FTSE 100 increasing this year, 7 or 8 appointments, new women appointments. But, we're always dealing with the law of small numbers. So we need all of the women to stay in post, more women to have been appointed in the year. And so in a typical year, we see just marginal progress. The CEO, as you've heard me say many times before, is our standout disappointing statistic amongst a sea of progress, really, at every other level. And I think what it shows is that there's much more work to be done here. We've still got a way to go. And, these jobs that are in the FTSE 350, there are 260 of them, the most powerful, the most influential, highest paid roles. And CEOs don't give up that job easily. So that was always going to be our very last hill to climb.
So, Denise, how do public companies compare with private companies in the UK?
Look, we've seen really great progress in the private companies. We only started to monitor those 2 years ago. And I think what this has shown is that, gender balance, women in senior roles, there's a near normalization of that. And the ripple effect has worked very well. So we were delighted when we saw last year that the private companies were doing well. They've increased again this year to 36%. Boards are slightly different. Boards in the private companies are lagging where the FTSE 350 are at just about 31% and static in the year. And I think that's a function probably, although we've got more research to do here. I think it's a function of there being different board structures in the private companies, more static, more founder-owned. So there's still more work to do there. But there's work to do everywhere until we really start to see women at every table and in every role, and particularly for women of colour, for women with caring responsibilities. We've got a way to go yet, but it's looking good. And
Denise,
what we're doing in the UK is working.
Yeah, the other question I had was, you talk about the motherhood discount. Working from home for companies that actually have mandated that most of the employees have to go back to the office. And if it's largely, I think, women that ask working from home, is there going to be an increase in the gap of senior females in 3, 4, 5 years if they're not visible in the office?
Well, I think it's a great point, and we've got to have a very good lens on that. It's probably early days, but much of this is encouraging men to take a big role in the home, to take a bigger role in the home, encouraging companies to not share just shared parental leave, which has been really quite flat and the take-up is poor, but companies to introduce equal parental leave, to give the same paid leave to men as women. Men bonding early on with their children is pivotal to how they develop with their their roles in the home and help other women in the workplace. So it's quite a complicated piece. And I do think companies have got to have a very close lens on that. They've got to make sure that they're not. It may sound great to say we let our employees do what we want, they let them choose, but then if you end up with, as you say, women predominantly in the home looking after the domestic responsibilities while men are in the workplace, and that 2-tier structure is going to be unhelpful to progress. So making sure that the rules apply to everybody and everybody does the same is important.
Denise, thank you so much for joining us today. That was Denise Wilson, Chief Executive of the FTSE Women Leaders Review. Now, coming up, it's been quite the week for UK home builders with the launch of a cartel probe and, of course, fears that the nation's housing shortage is set to go from bad to worse. We have the details next, and this is Bloomberg. Now, a report this week by the UK's competition watchdog into the chronic housing shortage was more controversial than expected. The CMA has opened a cartel investigation into information sharing between 8 home builders, including Barratt, Taylor Wimpey and Persimmon. It comes with the sector already under heavy pressure for failing to deliver enough affordable housing to meet demand. Now, let's discuss all of this with Bloomberg's real estate reporter Jack Sidders and John Stepek, author of Bloomberg's Money Distilled newsletter. This is the segment that everyone in the newsroom is watching because we have a number of people trying to get on the property ladder. Jack, give us a sense, first of all, on how, you're looking at rising rents. There's, this cartel. Like, how's property in general doing in the UK?
Well, big picture, I guess if we'd had this conversation a year ago, off the back of the mini-budget, we might have been talking about, the housing market looks, really problematic, potential for significant declines. And I think the data basically hasn't really borne that out. In real terms, prices definitely have corrected to some degree, but it's been nothing like as kind of gloomy as we might have expected. The home builders, they've massively pulled back in terms of how much they're building, which, is a big part of what we're talking about here with the CMA. And because this small group of big home builders are responsible for such a big proportion of housing output, they're a really, really important part of the market. Now, obviously, the reason they've pulled back significantly, they're expecting demand to be lower, mortgage costs are higher. But part of what that does is it helps keep pricing there. And that was one of the things that the CMA was looking into.
And John, I know a lot of people have seen Cartel, CMA. We saw a pullback in some of these home builders in terms of stock price, but you're not too worried about it.
Well, worried is maybe not the right word, but I think the house builders, by and large, there have been elements of this that they were quite pleased about, because the cartel investigation is basically a side issue. It's almost like the competition authorities gone into this and said, OK, well, there's this bit where it looks like they might be discussing with each other. We better delve into that deeper. But one of the big issues, for example, has always been, and certainly one of the big political hot buttons, has been the idea that developers are sitting on more land than they should be, in order to basically drive up prices artificially. And the CMA basically turned around and said, well, actually, no, if we look at the land banks, A, the amount of land that the house builders own is not that concerning in itself, and B, the fact that they own so much is because the planning system is basically really poor, and it takes so long to get through that you need a big bank of land in order to keep the developing going. And also, I think the other thing that was interesting is the CMA very clearly drew a line between what it described as housing demand and housing need. And the big difference is that obviously housing demand is people wanting to buy houses, but housing need is actually the fact that obviously everyone needs to live in a house and not everyone can afford to buy one. And the problem is that the house building sector and the private house building sector can only really be expected to respond to housing demand. They aren't in and of themselves going to automatically build enough houses to meet need. And I think it was that the focus of this investigation very much ended up being kind of punting the problem back to the government. It's like, look, the house builders, there's issues, but actually, if you want more houses, the government has to do something about the planning system.
Yeah, on the policy side, right? That's kind of how the easiest way, I guess, to fix things. Jack, give me a sense of, so I know you're looking at commercial real estate. I mean, you cover everything, basically. And I know there's a lot of questions. We had mortgage approvals that were higher than in the past. I mean, is it easier to get a mortgage? How much do you spend your time on, figuring out mortgages and rents, or commercial real estate going like Ari?
Yeah, well, so I think credit availability, very broadly, should we say, is crucial. So on the residential side, mortgage approvals going back up. I think the kind of key number there is what's happening with swap rates, and they've been coming down a little bit. So that's broadly good for mortgage availability, albeit that's moved slightly the other way more recently, but it's still a lot cheaper than it was. So that's kind of supportive for the housing market. On the commercial side, it's still feeding through to pricing. And credit availability, again, is all important, and also that kind of premium over the risk-free rate. So a lot of what we've been looking at recently is banks impairing their loan books or recognising potential losses from commercial real estate lending. For now, that's been sort of focused in the US, where the office market is very problematic, but we've had a lot of European banks reporting over the last week or two, and they're starting to increase their provisions too, so it's not just a US issue. For the UK, I think what we can say is probably the big UK lenders, NatWest, Lloyds, have broadly been much more conservative in where they've been lending on the commercial real estate side over this cycle, lending probably at loan-to-value ratios of sort of 50-55%, which means you'd have to have a really, really big, crash in property prices to impact them too severely. But some of the German banks, which we've been writing about, because pricing got so elevated there, that's starting to look more interesting, and there's an expectation that that we might need to see much more significant provisions there.
And John, so we have, of course, the UK budget. What are you expecting for house prices from now until the end of the year? This is my favourite question to John Stepek, because he always gives me news.
I think the credit availability, I think Jack just mentioned, is very much the main point. And while credit availability has picked up a bit over the last year, we still have to remember it's a lot more expensive than it was 2 or 3 years ago to buy a house. So on the one hand, as long as the economy stays kind of mediocre and the jobs market stays strong, then I don't see any reason for house prices to massively collapse, because people will be able to pay their mortgages and there's no forced sellers. At the same time, if interest rates remain around current levels, and recently mortgage rates have been kind of flattening out as opposed to dropping back, it's hard to see how you get a massive kind of rally from here, because people are already at the top end of their affordability.
So interesting. Thank you both for joining us, Bloomberg's Jack Sidders and John Stepek. Coming up, we're joined by the chief executive of Moncler, the luxury brand, reporting a year of industry-leading growth. Well, that's coming up next. We speak with Remo Ruffini, and this is Bloomberg.